My name is Bill Hargrove, and I'm a research ecologist with the USDA Forest Service. So I'm going to be trying to get you to think today about trees and forests and large data sets. I realize that we're in the sleepy time slot after lunch, and so I'll try to keep it upbeat, and we'll go kind of quickly to keep everybody on their toes. Thanks for coming. Now, I've noticed that a lot of the talks at Phosphor-G are really focused on the open source tools themselves. And I want to confess right up front that I have kind of a different philosophy. I think that our open source tools are very widespread and well respected now. And it's kind of almost a disservice, I think, to keep concentrating unduly on the tools themselves. Instead, I am going to wish that we emphasize the projects that were made possible by the open source tools. And so I know not what course others may take, but as for me, I'm going to be doing less talk about the socket wrenches themselves and more talk about the race cars that we built with those socket wrenches. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Now, ecology is kind of messy. It's a sort of a soft science. We don't have very many equations. It's not like physics. It's not clockwork. It's not billiard balls. The order of operations matters a lot. But nevertheless, it has really large data sets, but they're kind of imprecise. And some ecologists would have us try to divine how things work and develop process-based approaches and not really do anything until we're quite sure that we know exactly how everything works. I think that's a dangerous idea because I think on the whole we don't have a very good idea how most ecology works. And so I'm going to suggest in this talk that an opposite sort of an approach, empirical data mining on very large data sets, is really the thing we should concentrate on. Data mining allows patterns to emerge naturally from data sets. And that means the patterns are unmolested, unbiased by the things that we thought we understood but we didn't get right. So now, most of I'm going to give really a lot of examples here today. Most of them have to do with the concept of ecoregions. And an ecoregion in ecology is a geographic area within which ecologically important parameters are all kind of the same. So it's really a map, a categorical map that is easier for people to get their heads around than trying to keep track of a whole lot of gradients of various things. The one that you may be most familiar with is the USDA plant hardiness zones, although there are many, many other examples. And before at least we came along, these ecoregion maps were typically drawn freehand by experts. So they are based on expertise and experience, but they are qualitative, not quantitative. And so they're drawn as art by artists, essentially. For several decades now, we have been using statistical multivariate clustering, which you may know as unsupervised classification, to try to bring this process of drawing ecoregions into a quantitative kind of a realm and actually being able to use statistics to do it. So this unsupervised classification algorithm takes every map cell out of the map, and it has a number of characteristics associated with it, so it's a bunch of GIS layers, and it's assigned to a cluster whose centroid is closest in Euclidean space in a data space to that observation. And then every observation is assigned to a cluster, and then the cluster centroid is recalculated, and it's an iterative process until the assignment converges. Let me show you how this works. We actually have an ability to control the number of clusters or ecoregions that we want to produce. So if we produce a large number, then those regions are small geographically and they're very highly specifically characterized statistically. If we produce only a few, they're large and they're very general. Now, we can pick, for example, a set of 25 environmental properties. I've got elevation, I've got maximum, mean, and minimum annual temperature. I've got monthly mean precip, some soil characteristics, and some solar characteristics. And we can use this statistical process and say, ask it to show us the 100 most different ecoregions across the United States. And we see things that we can immediately recognize. We see the coastal plain and the Piedmont. We see the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains. Notice that the Ozarks, at this level of division of 100, are joined together with the Appalachians. And over here we see the Central Valley of California is a single ecoregion. Now, a human expert could probably still have drawn this map, but we can keep going. So what if we ask the statistical process to show us the 1,000 most different ecoregions in the conterminous U.S. based on those same 25 characteristics? And now we see we've got the above and below the fall line, we've got the Smokies separated from the Ozarks, and we've got actually 4 different ecoregions in a north-south gradient along the Central Valley of California. Now, and this is probably too detailed a map. It couldn't really have been produced by an expert ecologist. Now, notice this little note down here at the bottom. This is an old product, and I don't mean to suggest that we waited 10.6 months. This was folded up parallel time, but nevertheless, this, at the time we generated this map, it represented a significant computational investment, even on the machines at Oak Ridge. Now, because this is quantitative, we can do a lot more than just draw the ecoregions themselves. You can take your finger and put it down somewhere on the map. Here I've indicated the Smoky Mountains, and we can calculate a degree of multivariate similarity between every other location in the map and this particular home point, you might say. And so what we get to see is that in terms of all 25 of those variables, the Smokies are very, very similar to the Ozarks, but they're very similar to the Adirondacks in New York, but they're especially similar to the Monongahela's in West Virginia. So we're really characterizing what we mean by the multivariate Smoky Mountains-ness of this. And this is something that's very useful to ecologists. Now, instead of just putting our finger down in one place on the map, we can put our finger down in a whole bunch of different places. All these red spots are the national parks in the United States. And the concept here is that national parks may represent biotic preserves for plants and animals. Now we're asking the question, how well does this spatial constellation of these parks represent the environments that are throughout the whole conterminous United States? The answer is pretty well, except we need more parks in the western U.S. and the Pacific Northwest. We haven't captured those environments so well in park locations. Now, I have to make a little confession here. I've indicated that we had trouble getting computational resources that were sufficient to do some of these calculations. And earlier in my career at Oak Ridge National Lab, we learned of the work of Tom Sterling and construction of the Beowulf machine, the very first commodity cluster computer. And we thought that was a great idea. In the summer of 1997, seems like only yesterday, we wrote a proposal. And we said, oh, we got to try this. We're going to propose to Oak Ridge National Lab that we build a supercomputer by ganging together large numbers of personal computers. They, of course, not only rejected us, but the reviews made it quite clear they thought we were out of our minds. And I wish I'd saved those reviews, actually. But we said, oh, we got to do this. We're missing the boat here. And we realized there was a thing called the swap shop. And when you have federal property that you want to get rid of, you can't just get rid of it. You have to post it on the swap shop in case someone else wants to use it for something else. And so my colleagues and I collected, I think, over 400 or 500 of these disposable, surplus, trashed computers. And over the next several years, we created a cluster computer, the first cluster computer at Oak Ridge National Lab. We called it the Stone Supercomputer, named after the fable of Stone Soup, where the hungry soldier comes and begs and gets everybody to contribute stuff, and then everybody eats. So we did a large number of these. This is what the Stone Supercomputer looked like in the fall of 1997. Not much. In fact, we even had, check out the 5 1/4 drives. We even had a lot of keyboards, so clear we didn't know what we were doing. By January 98, got bigger. We had a crash cart. We'd roll this around. We were having trouble with a node. here's what it looked like in October of 1998. The computer rooms, mainframe computer rooms, were easy to get. No one had mainframes anymore. Everyone had gone to desktop workstations, so these were easy to find. It would keep your butt warm. It was a couch. I'll call your attention to all these dead bodies stacked around the corner. And finally, in May of 1999, we really got the machine up and running, 128 nodes, and it represented quite a substantial computational resource for us. We used it over the next dozen to 15 years. This is, I'm particularly proud of this. This is iterations per second on this clustering algorithm, and the Silicon Graphics dedicated mainframe beats pants off of us. This was a Sun Ultra 2 cluster, but it only had 8 CPUs, couldn't scale any higher than that. This one is particularly proud of this. We were able to match pace with the ORNL Intel Paragon XPS-5 supercomputer. And so the management at Oak Ridge didn't really like to see this graph, since they spent a number of millions of dollars on this machine while we created this one out of throwaway trash. In 2001, we were invited to write an article in Scientific American called The Do-It-Yourself Supercomputer, and we got Thomas Sterling to join us on that, and that was a lot of fun. And to this day, I think there are 2 Wikipedia entries, one for the Stone supercomputer proper, and it's listed again under cluster computing. And of course, these days, all the computers on the top 500 list are cluster computers. So we get to say that we built the first one at Oak Ridge National Lab. Now, these days, we have access to considerably more computational power. This is the Titan. It's now the second fastest, but soon it will be the Summit, and I think it'll rejoin number 1. We use these very same algorithms to create for the National Science Foundation's National Ecological Observatory Network a set of domains, which is just another word for ecoregions. And these domains will provide this neon design with a statistically based scientific underpinning. It's a huge effort. They've spent more than $600 million, and they're just starting to build out this neon network based on our ecoregions. Now, you can do something else that's cool, besides just generating ecoregions in one map. You can put 3 together in the same pot. And now, so it says this is a current conditions of the U.S. versus 2 alternative competing projected future realities. And we get to see that this yellow region is still the same as this yellow region is still the same as this region. But take a look at the Piedmont here up in Raleigh, this sort of pink color. According to this model, it turns into a kind of an Atlantic seaboard thing and a Mississippi piece. But look at this model over here. It disappears almost completely, and it's replaced by something that we have not ever seen the likes of before, a new, novel combination. So these sorts of clusterings through time and space let us do things like this and say to people, okay, future Pittsburgh is going to be like present Atlanta. Future Dallas is going to be like present Houston. So this really brings home these kinds of predictions and their significance. Now, we can also do this globally with GCMs. This is grid cells. It's the area on the Earth, which is a zero-sum game. And I've eliminated all the lines that are flat here. These are years. This is the year 2000 to the year 3000. And if you look, the ones that are climbing here are summer and hot and dry, and the ones that are going down are winter and cold. So clearly, in one glance, we can see that this model predicts a warming scenario for the Earth. Now, extending this idea, I've got a project right now that we call Forecasts, and it's a self-referential thing. It means forecasts of climate-associated shifts in tree species. So what we're talking about now is the range, the geographic range of a particular tree species, and how that will move under various predictions of future climatic shift. And the purpose of this really is rapid vulnerability. Triage is what we're really talking about. We're trying to identify the tree species that are going to have the greatest impacts from climate change. And we've done this for many species now. This is all the land surface on the Earth, all the land surface area on the Earth at 4 square kilometers. And in fact, it's 2 GCMs and 2 scenarios for each GCM and 2 dates, 2050 and 2100. For each of those, it's 2 times 2 times 2 is 8 Earths plus present conditions, 9 copies of the globe in this massive data analysis. And we've generated 30,000 global quantitative ecoregions. And these are based on 17 ecological variables that I won't go into. But it's not unlike the list of 25 I showed you earlier. And this is the current subset of those 30,000 that occurs in the United States in the present conditions, one copy of the Earth. And you can perhaps already imagine how this is going to work. Here's Raleigh. This is present. Here's 2050. Here's 2100. And you see this kind of green one here, and it jumps up into Virginia, and then it finally jumps up into Pennsylvania. So we get these jumping ecoregions that show us that North Carolina-ness has become Virginia-ness, has become Pennsylvania-ness, just the same way that we talked about Smoky Mountains-ness a minute ago. So how does this work? For each tree species, we use Forest Service plot data within the United States. If it's outside the United States, we have to use GBIF, which is a worldwide data source. And the idea is to find the subset of these 30,000 ecoregions that are occupied by individuals of this tree species today. That is a way to predict its present-day range. And then we look at tracking that same subset of suitable ecoregions into the future on those other 8 copies of the Earth. And what we want to see is, did it move, did it shrink, did it grow, did it overlap, or did it vanish? And so here's an example. This is northern red oak, and the red color here is present range, the green color is future range, and the yellow color is the overlap, the place where future and present coexist. And this blue line, this blue line right here is a Forest Service range map for the current range of northern red oak. We've predicted it with this model. So notice how well the red plus the yellow makes up this blue perimeter. So we've successfully predicted the present range, and now you may want to turn those next 8 pages and see what the future holds for this particular tree species. We've done this for 325 tree species now, which is essentially every woody species that occurs in North America, in CONUS. Now, you don't have to be limited to the land. You can do the same sort of thing in the water. So in this example, we've generated 5,000 most different global aquatic ecoregions. And you can see that out away from everything, they're sort of latitudinal, but up at the next coast of land, they sort of start to get mixed up. Now, why, you're saying, why, Bill? This is just a parlor trick now. Why would you ever want to do anything like this? Think about the Great Lakes. They have a terrible problem with aquatic invasive species. And it's container ships. They fill with ballast water at their home port. Then they go to the destination port and they dump the ballast water along with whatever propagules and other kinds of living things there are, and as they load the cargo on. And here's the Great Lakes. Let me call your attention to this sort of magenta thing at the bottom of Lake Michigan. And this is the Mediterranean. Can you see the white boot of Italy here? It's the Mediterranean, and this is the Caspian Sea, I think. And notice that even after we divide into 5,000 most different aquatic ecoregions, the Caspian Sea is in exactly the same aquatic ecoregion as the southern part of Lake Michigan. So any propagule that gets sucked up here and discharged here, or conversely, sucked up here and discharged here, will almost certainly find exactly ideal aquatic conditions, and it'll may be able to establish a foothold. And there are other similarities as well. The Black Sea and Erie. That's Erie, right? Something else we're working on that's brand new is a global classification of contemporary fire regimes. So we're using the MODIS sensors. There are 2 MODIS sensors on Aqua and Terra satellites, and they both have a thermal device that can see fires. And each of those satellites passes twice at night and twice during the day, 4 passes a day each. And they've been orbiting for 14 years. So this is literally billions and billions of satellite fire detections over almost 1.5 decades. It includes human-caused and wildfires. And we're clustering these globally into the 1,000 most different fire regime types globally. The goal here is to to find a sort of a synoptic global perspective on fire and to look at the patterns of fire characteristics across our entire planet. And we've got 19 variables, but they're really in 4 groups. There's within-year fire seasonality. There's across-year or multi-year fire seasonality. There's combustion temperature, which shows you the difference between a meandering ground fire versus a roaring crown fire, and also just the simple density, the number of fires in a particular area. And because this is global, you have to be careful, because if you think about it, the southern hemisphere is having summer when the northern hemisphere is having winter. So we have to do a transform here. We do a 178-day time shift for all southern hemisphere burn dates to essentially transform the global seasonality to be in terms of the northern hemisphere seasons. And when we do that, this is what we get. The colors here are also statistically determined. So the hue of the color tells you something about the characteristics of the fire regime at that particular location. But you can already see that Perth, Australia has a pretty similar fire regime to the Horn of South Africa and matches pretty well with the Columbia River Basin in the Pacific Northwest. And we've got a similarity between the parts of the Mississippi Valley and Central Europe, and the Yucatan Peninsula matches pretty well with the eastern part of Brazil. Here's a zoom on South America. The gray parts don't have enough fires to make it make sense to really talk about a fire regime. So gray is an absence of burning. Now, let me talk about LiDAR as another large data source for data mining. I think everybody in this room knows that LiDAR is a laser device that's airborne. It shoots pulses. We get reflections from various parts of the forest vertical structure. And based on very accurate clocks and flight time, we can construct a point cloud that shows the volume of the above-ground biomass for the forest. This is the Tennessee side of, this is Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And there were 724 LAS files in 1.5 kilometer square tiles. Each one has something like 2 to 3 billion returns, I think. And what we've done in this LiDAR analysis is we've coarsened the data, still pretty fine, to 30 meters. And this is an example. There are about 4,000 points in this 30 by 30 meter example. And you can see the trees. And in fact, you can see the slope as well. The next step is we shave the earth. We subtract away the elevation by using what we hope is a very accurate digital elevation model. So now it's on the same trees on a flat surface. And now we just go across, and every one of these bands, these vertical bands, shows the percent or proportion of total reflectances that were in that 30-meter cell that were due to that particular height band. So we have a vertical profile now for every one of these, and you can guess the next step, can't you? We clustered these, and of course it's a parallel process. And in this particular example, we use 1 meter vertical bins up to 75 maps, 75 separate maps. And so initially we've made the problem worse. We've increased the data volume, but now we use this clustering trick, and we've asked for the 30 most representative vertical biomass profiles, and we're going to show the regions that have as their common uniting principle the same kind of vertical biomass. There are a couple of these are baloney. If you look at this one, that's a data error, but it's only 0.04% of the landscape. This one's also boo-boo, but it's only 0.130. And I'll mention that when you have when you have big data, you have more bad data. So you just have to get used to that, and there's no purifying it. Although clustering will sometimes essentially throw all the trash in one or a few trash cans for you. Now here's what the Smokies, the Tennessee side of the Smokies looks like. If you color these, the colors are not so great here, but they are cohesive. They retain their geographic cohesiveness. This is Cades Cove, which stands out rather nicely. And we did something else as well. We call this label stealing. So rather than just have cluster number 30, what we'd really like to have is some indication of what kind of forest this is. And so we have a technique that's called map curves. It just essentially relies on spatial juxtaposition and overlay using a goodness of fit score that both gives you credit for overlap but gives you demerits or debits for miss. And this is the map we stole the labels from. This is the Overstory vegetation cover map for Great Smoky Mountains. And we obtain then for each one of these 30 clusters not number 3, which was baloney, not number 11, which was baloney, but for every other one, we get a name now. And this increases the utility for foresters and ecologists, because now it's not just cluster 30, it's chestnut oak forest. And here's the vegetation map with its names. Here's the 30 clustered by vertical profile map. And this is the same map as this one, except we've stolen the colors and stolen the labels from this one. And this is the goodness of fit. So we get an idea about how well we're doing with that. Now, it's usually a many-to-one relationship between the vertical profiles and the forest types. For example, these 4 are all yellow pine. But if you look, you can see something here. I've editorially arranged these. Our suspicion is that this is an older stand of yellow pine that's grown taller, whereas this is a younger stand. So there's a fascinating potential here that I can't prove yet, that we may actually be able to infer something about the age of the stand or the time since the last disturbance. So we've not only done this for the Tennessee side of the Smokies, we've actually done it for all of the state of North Carolina. It's 60-foot horizontal resolution. There are over 750 million cells, and we divided it into 34 vertical layers. And this took the Titan at ORNL to deal with that. I'm just showing you a 200 clustered, which is relatively fine, clustered vertical profile for western North Carolina here. And it looks like sort of like salt and pepper at this, but if you zoom in, you can make a lot of sense out of this, and let me prove that to you. This is a simple RGB coloring. So the blue here is the overstory. Green, the green part of the color mix is mid-canopy, and the red is understory. So purple is blue plus red, and that's a common one because it's overstory and understory. And it still, at this scale, it's hard to make sense of, but if you zoom in, this right here is the outline of the Shining Rock Wilderness in Pisgah National Forest, and these trees tend to be shorter in stature because it's essentially a higher elevation, and the very shortest ones are up along the ridgeline. So it works out very well. Now we can do one other thing. We can show the percentage that the tall trees represent of the total profile. So here, blue places, which are down in the cracks, it's cove forests, are indicating cases where that's the tallest trees are the profile. Green is where there's tall trees, but it's also a very well-developed mid or understory. And orange locations are the ones that have very few tall trees. And we can zoom in again here. This is the Blue Ridge Parkway running up right up here. This is Mount Mitchell. And of course, at the highest elevations, you got nothing but short stature trees. And these coves are the cove hardwoods with the very tallest trees. This is the Asheville watershed with the drinking source for drinking water in Asheville. So clustering and data mining of these LiDAR data go from billions and billions of LiDAR points down to a single map, a single categorical map that shows 30 or however many you wish, distinctly different distributions of above-ground biomass. And above-ground biomass is both an important part of the primary characteristic of the forest, but it's also a very important characteristic that describes the habitat for birds in particular and other animals. So it's of interest not only to the Forest Service, but to Fish and Wildlife and others. Now I want to shift gears here at the end and talk about our other big project that we call FORWARN. That's short for Forest Warning. And this is a satellite-based system that we have in operation since January of 2010 that produces maps that recognize, identify, and track all kinds of vegetation disturbances, and the extent is the entire lower 48 United States. And I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but we make new maps every 8 days, a suite of products, and we deliver these. And this is not black magic. It's based on a simple comparison between two things. It uses normalized difference vegetation index, which is greenness, essentially satellite greenness. We get the current greenness from the two MODIS sensors, and then we compare that with an expectation that we have, that we develop historically, for how green, healthy, undisturbed vegetation of the sort growing at this particular location at this particular time of year should be. And then any departures between those two, any differences between those two, are the basis for forewarn identifying this spot as having something going on, some kind of a disturbance. And it works very well, and people like it a lot. My colleagues at NEMAC have developed a viewer that is the last mile delivery system for this, and we call it the Forest Change Assessment Viewer, and it's at this URL. You can go there right now. The viewer is the main delivery vehicle for all the current maps that are output in Forewarn, as well as all the historical products we've ever produced. It's totally open to anybody. There's no user ID. There's no password. It just uses a simple browser. Nothing is downloaded to your machine. And perhaps the most useful thing from a forestry perspective is that we show lots of other relevant maps of other forest disturbances within the same viewer. So information about past insect outbreaks, past diseases, past wildfire burns. So the idea is that it's really an assessment viewer. And so you can not only check to see if a particular disturbance is real, but by the time you push away, you can be in a pretty good position to assess the likely causes of a potential new disturbance just based on weight of evidence. This is very egalitarian, very level playing field, democratic. We use the same set of tools as all our users do. Here's an example of a forewarn image from June of 2011. We had a spate of tornadoes across the southeastern U.S. And I hope you can see all these yellow and red sort of parallel cat scratches. These are tornado tracks. And you can see, I think I got another one here. Yeah, so this is a blink comparison between the National Weather Service map of some of these tornado tracks and the Forewarn product. And in the Weather Service map, they've used the Fujita scale, and EF3, 4, and 5 is blue, purple, and red, so that's increasing in severity. And our Forewarn system detects all of those very easily, and Forewarn is also able to detect some of the EF2 tornadoes, which are the light blue ones, so we sort of get that one, but we sort of missed this one. And Forewarn actually detects a few that the Weather Service didn't map for whatever reason. There's one right here we see that they don't. But notice that the Forewarn product is seeing the dynamic aspect of these tornadoes. So it's not an even, it sees the jumping and skipping, and sometimes it's red and sometimes it's yellow. So it's not mapped with a simple linear straight line like the Weather Service is doing. Now here's a tornado. This is the Yazoo, Mississippi tornado track. It happened in 2009. And the length of these base maps, remember I said we compare two things, the current with an expected definition of normal, and we can vary how far back in time that definition of normal goes. And so if this is a 1-year definition of normal, so if we look at the tornado that happened in 2009, in 2010 with a 1-year baseline, we see the kind of things we just saw, the red and yellow outlines. But if we look in 2011 with a 1-year baseline, now there's a new normal because we have defined normal to be the vegetation state in the tornado track. And so what Forewarn sees now is rapidly recovering vegetation. And so in this way, Forewarn sees not only disturbances, but can track the recovery in the vegetation. Now, the viewer has something else that's really cool and very addictive. You can click on a spot, and after a few seconds, you get a graph like this. And the vertical axis is the greenness, and the horizontal axis is years. So this happens to be eastern Kentucky in strip mining country. If you click here, you can quite easily see that this strip mine began in 2007. If you click over here, you can see that this particular strip mine ended in 2003 and was replanted in something. So you can track and get an idea about the history of the disturbance. This is Linville Gorge. A lot of people may know where that is. There was a wildfire here in 2000, and you can see it set things back, but then there was some recovery going on, and there was a second wildfire then that occurred in 2007, and since then there's actually been another one. But look, something happened, and the whole system reset to a new state. If you go to Linville Gorge today, this is what you see. Burned tree trunks, and a lot of paulownia, which is a princess tree, an invasive species, took advantage of this 1-2 disturbance to gain a foothold and take over. All right, I'm almost finished here. This is Smoky Mountains again. This is a nape image, and these gray spots are standing gray ghosts, we call them, the standing dead trunks of hemlock trees that have been killed by an invasive insect, the hemlock woolly adelgid. And we can look at the track here, and it shows this very characteristic fingerprint or signature of decreasing winter minimums. This is going from a more evergreen signature to a more deciduous signature with the loss of this important evergreen species. You can actually mine that data signature to generate a map of the extent of hemlock woolly adelgid damage. This is forewarned compared to drought. This is the National Drought Monitor, and we always match very well drought. Fire is usually the next step. This is the Biscuit Fire, happened in 2003 in Oregon and California on the border. This is a pixel that didn't burn. Here's a pixel that did. It comes down, and there's a gradual increase, a gradual recovery. We can extrapolate this to a point up here to predict how many years it will take to recover the greenness. And so we're making a prediction about future years to recovery. I'm almost finished. And Biscuit Fire doesn't look too bad. Here's the Heyman Fire, quite a different story. It's totally flat. Most of the places in the Heyman Fire in Colorado are going to take more than 100 years to recover if they ever do. So we do this all the time, all across the country, and forewarn when we see detections, we make identifications. And here's my last slide. In conclusion, I'll say that speed may, I think, be the most important advantage to this kind of empirical data mining as we are faced with more and more drastic environmental choices. It may be the thing that helps us to find the way forward. I know that was fast. The slides are available here. The forewarn webpage is here. And just for perspective, I've included the Laetoli trackway in eastern Africa where two Australopithecine proto-hominids walked side by side in volcanic tuff 3.6 million years ago. And if there's any time, I'd be glad to answer questions. But there may not be. Okay. Thank you for your attention.